Hello and welcome to the 17th video lecture of Marketing Research, Semester 5, Module number 2. In today's video lecture, we are going to discuss about advantages and disadvantages of primary data. Now, what are the advantages of primary data? In a previous lecture, we have seen about what is primary data. Primary data refers to first-hand data or first-hand information that you collect for your research itself. So here the researcher, that is you are collecting the information for your research problem. So when you are doing this, you are getting first-hand information, and that is primary data. Now, primary data advantages are used because it has some advantages. Some of them are it is a real-time data, that is, it is up-to-date data. Many times we have seen that in if we use some other data which someone else has collected, that is, if we use secondary data, he has collected it in the past and hence it is historical data or past data. Whereas the problem which you are facing, you are doing a research now itself and you are collecting the data for that research now. So that is why this data is a real-time data, that is up-to-date data. Right now, what is the position of the variables or the data? So that is what you will collect. The second point why, or the second advantage of using primary data is that it is more accurate and reliable. The accuracy and reliability is very high, again because you yourself are collecting the data, so there won't be any bias. If there is any bias, you will get to know what is the bias, if there is responder bias, or if there is respondent bias, or if it is researcher bias. So what kind of bias it is, you will get to know if there is. And generally when you want to do a research in a very proper way, there won't be any bias to it, that is, you would like to do a very correct type of a research. So the accuracy rate, and you yourself are collecting data, so you will try to get the accurate data from the market. There won't be such things like someone else has got the data and you don't know how he has got the data. So there will be inaccuracy in secondary data. That disadvantage of secondary data is overcome when you take primary data. You will take all the care such that the data is very accurate and hence it becomes very reliable to be used in your research. Then the third advantage we are talking about is that it is specific to the researcher's need. So you are collecting the data because you have a research problem, and then you will collect the data which is very specific or relevant to your researcher's problem, that is your problem. So the primary data is always very specific to the researcher's problem. Then we also have one more advantage, that is you have higher level of control. You have higher level of control over the flow of information or how the information is gathered. So all these techniques you will be using which you want in your research to be used. Whereas if we talk about secondary data, we don't know what exactly techniques were used to collect the data. So whatever techniques were used to collect the data, we accept that itself in secondary data. We cannot change the technique right now because we cannot go to the past and change the technique. But in primary data, it is your wish what technique you are going to use. Are you going for interview, are you going for observation, are you going for questionnaire, so that is survey. So it depends upon you, the technique that you are going to use. So how the information is gathered, whether you yourself are going, the researcher that is going to the field, or you are sending some enumerators. So that also you can think about. So whether your interview is going to be disguised interview or it is going to be a straightforward interview. So all these things you can discuss or decide before collecting the data, and hence you have a very high level of control on how information is gathered. And lastly, the information is collected by you, and hence you have some proprietary rights over it. So you become the owner of the information. If you want, later on you can sell the information if it is needed. So these are some of the advantages of primary data. Now examples of primary data, for example. Before that, disadvantages of primary data. Now, what are the disadvantages of primary data? We know primary data has some advantages, but along with those advantages come where some disadvantages. That is, the process is very involved. Involved in the sense, researcher has to be involved. He is required to give his continuous inputs and have a control over how the information is gathered. So he becomes engaged in completely in the process of data collection. Secondly, it is very expensive because you are going to the field and collecting the data, and then once you are collecting the data, you are when you're going to the field and collecting the data, it incurs lot of cost. Either you are going or you are sending your enumerators, so it becomes too costly affair. Then one more disadvantage is, third point is that it takes long time. Again, it involves lot of field work. So because field work is involved, this respondents may be scattered also sometimes over geographical territory. So going there, interviewing them or getting the questionnaires filled from them may take long time. So hence, if you want immediate results or immediately you want any solution for your problem, primary data cannot provide it. You have to go for secondary data. But uh, why? Because primary data involves very long time of data collection. Then it has some other limits also, limitations of itself. That is, primary data is limited to specific time. That is, primary data, whatever data you are collecting, is related to only this time. That is, many times we say that in a research we write the limitations, and we limitations is this research, the data was collected in such a period, in such a location, and this becomes, and from such a participants. So this data may not be applicable or generalized for all the locations or at all the times. So this becomes the limitations of primary data. Because it is real-time data, we don't know whether this data will be true in the past or in the future. Similarly, we have collected data from a certain geographical territory, so we do not know whether this data becomes can be generalized to the entire market. And also the number of participants also, sometimes because we are collecting primary data, we may go for less number of participants, so a smaller sample size can result. So there are a lot of limitations of uh, primary data. Now, what are the sources of primary data? There are some very important sources of primary data, or from where primary data is collected. So these are, first one, interview. That is, it can be personal interview or telephonic interview. Then we have self-administered surveys and questionnaires. So surveys and questionnaires is like giving feedback form to customers, or giving feedback form to the respondents. Then we have field observation, where the researcher goes to the field and collects information about it, anything. Then we have experiments. Experiments can be done on lab. Generally it is done in lab, and data is collected, or sometimes on the field also. Life histories, biographies of certain people also provide you primary data. Then action research, as we have discussed, is a very important source of primary data, because here the researcher itself will maintain a record, and that record can be used as primary data. Then case studies also can be a very good source of primary data. Here only one specific thing is studied in detail. Diary entries, letters and other correspondence done by the researcher or some other people. So their diaries, so your respondents diaries, respondents letters, the correspondence that has come, the outward letters, the inward letters. So all these things also can be a good example of primary data. Also eyewitness accounts. For example, if there is an accident that has happened and you go and collect information about it, the police go there and collect information about it to register the FIR. So this is an example of primary data. They are collecting primary data through people who have actually witnessed the incident. And ethnographic studies, we have seen this ethnographic studies. It relates to the study of culture of people. And what happens in ethnographic research generally is, the researcher goes there, tries to experience the culture, the tradition of a group of people, and to experience that, he or she stays along with them for a few days or a few weeks or a few months, and makes notes about the various cultural things that they follow. So these are ethnographic research. And along with that, lastly we have personal negatives or memoirs. So someone who has written a negative like autobiography or a biography of someone else, so narratives about an incident. So if certain incident has happened, like for example demonetization, and I'm writing thing about demonetization, so this can become a primary data for someone else. Memoirs, for example, if in the memory of someone or in the memory of certain incident, some incident, so you come up with some souvenirs, some memoirs on certain incidents for in the occasions like golden jubilee, silver jubilee. So all these things also can serve as records or which can be used for primary data. So with this we end today's lecture. Today we have studied about advantages of primary data and disadvantages of primary data. Along with that, what are the sources of primary data. So hope you have understood this. If there is any difficulty, you can always